Welcome, Leith. Thanks so much for joining me.
G'day, Catherine. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. It's, the day we're recording this, it's about 35 degrees, everyone. So I'm out in my man cave without air conditioning. So if I start to sweat, that's why.
37 degrees, I think.
Oh, wow.
Where I was. I've got the air conditioning on anyway. I'm really excited to have you because like you went from being kind of like a small fish in the pond, and we used to chat and it used to be really nice, and now you're like a big superstar. You're on the ABC. Every time I call you, you've got interviews on the ABC, you've got it on Sky. You're almost too big for us to have on anymore. It's almost got to the point now where I feel like pretty honored to be talking to you. To be famous.
That's giving me a big head. No, not really. Look. It's it's been good. I said to myself last year, because I used to get quite a few media requests, and I'd sort of be, I couldn't be bothered doing them. I used to push back a bit. And then last year I said, look, you know what? I'm just going to say yes and see what happens. And the more you say yes, the more people ask you, and then before you know it, you're just getting asked almost every day. So pretty much, I started uploading all my videos onto my YouTube channel, which is at Leith Vo, Leithvo, and basically I thought I'd be doing maybe 2 a week, and it seems I'm uploading every day now because I'm pretty much doing an interview every day these days on radio, TV, whatever. So anyway, it's been good. Look, the beauty of this work from home thing, and I've been doing it for 12 years, and technology and the internet and all that sort of stuff, is I can do all these interviews from home. And so I'm talking to you, obviously, from my bungalow out the back, my man cave. And this is basically where I do my interviews. I don't have to go anywhere. I can wear shorts down the bottom, which you won't see. Business at the top, party at the bottom. And it's great. So look, it's been really good. I'm always willing to talk to you, Catherine. You just need to book it in. That's all. Because I sort of, there's literally some days where I might do 3 interviews, which is just, you can get pretty tiring. A morning one, a midday one, then a nighttime one. So I just need to book it in.
Yeah, we had a chat about it the other day because I was on the ABC not so long ago. They come to me, the ABC, they bring the camera now and set it all up. You have to destroy your home for it, where they set it all up for you.
Yeah, they're a little bit old school. So ABC still comes around and brings the camera. So I haven't done the ABC TV for a while, but I do radio a fair bit now. I actually prefer just doing it like this. You can do it over Skype, Zoom, whatever. So it's just, if you have a decent webcam, decent mic, a light, all that sort of stuff, there's no reason you can't do it from home, which is basically what I've been doing.
Agree with you. I agree. I much prefer doing it on Zoom. I can set all the lighting up so that I look all right and don't have to worry about that. But onto the reason I actually reached out. It's been a while since we spoke. I think the last conversation we had when I was still at Fat Tail, still writing for Fat Tail. Obviously, I'm now sort of launched Land Cycle Investor, and I'm so happy with it. I mean, it gives me sort of free reign to talk about a lot of stuff that maybe I wouldn't have spoken about when I was working for Fat Tail Investment Research, though I absolutely loved it there and love all the guys there. But one of the reasons I reached out to you is because a subscriber, and thanks to all the subscribers that send me interesting information, I always appreciate it, but they forwarded me a post from a property spruiker. I won't mention her name, but it was almost written, it was almost a plagiarized article of a post that you'd put up on Macro Business, had all your charts, it had kind of like all the data there, word for word, about the drop in the birth rate and what this was going to do for the housing market. So we could start there if you like, because it's an interesting tale. And one of the reasons I think it's interesting is, I've spoken a bit, I don't know whether I've spoken to you about him, but I've spoken a bit on my podcasts and in my articles about Roy Wenzlick, who was a market forecaster, property market forecaster, who wrote annual reports. He was the first person to publish annual property reports for the property market in the US, and he made very accurate predictions, and he was an 18-year cycler, so he'd done all the research on the 18-year cycle and came out, and in the middle of the Great Depression he said, folks, there's going to be a boom. And his analysis was so detailed that he would do kind of what you've done in that article, and obviously it was only a short article, but he would take who's getting married, who's having kids. It's those demographics that are going to drive the housing market, and depending on the amount of supply out there, either cause a boom or a bust or whatever. So let's start with that. What's going on with Australia's birth rate?
Yeah, look, Australia's birth rate's crashing. It's crashing all over the developed world. but we're backfilling that by just importing huge volumes of people through immigration. And in fact, all the Anglo nations, not so much the US, but Australia, Canada, New Zealand, even the UK, we're all doing the same thing. So we're basically, and this is a developed world phenomenon. So basically, women are having less kids these days than what they used to. We've got aging populations, and so basically, the birth rate needs to be about 2.1 for replacement. So if you want to just keep your population steady over, say, a 50-year period without any immigration, you need to have about 2.1. That accounts for a small number of deaths. And in the fatalities close to birth. And Australia's is, I think it was about 1.5 something. And last time I checked, and it's even lower in some other countries. Maybe it's 1.6, but regardless, it's below replacement. So effectively, us and these other Anglo nations are all overcoming that by importing a lot of people through immigration. And in Australia's case and Canada's case in particular, we're doing it on steroids, where we're importing a huge volumes of people, and it's basically creating problems because we can't build houses, we can't build infrastructure quick enough to absorb those people, especially in the post-pandemic environment of high labour costs, high interest rates, labour shortages. Building materials have gone through the roof, etc. So basically, we've got this situation, same in Canada, whereby housing construction's falling at the same time as our populations are growing at a record rate, and that's just creating a massive housing supply shortage. And we're seeing it in the rental market most furiously, where the rental vacancy rates collapsed to about 1%. We've got rents going up at a very high rate, both Australia and Canada. And also in Australia's case, at least, it's led to this rebound in prices. So after the Reserve Bank started lifting rates in May 2002, we had a dip in prices all the way through to December, roughly, to December 2002, and then since then prices have been rising. So despite the fact we've got very high, the ratio of mortgage payments to income has never been higher, and people are under mortgage stress, etc. Prices continue to rise, and that's largely a population story because we've got so much population growth.
I listen to this housing story all the time, and when I first went to write for Fat Tail, and they reached out to me and said, we want someone to take over this publication. I went in and had an interview, and they said, one of the questions they had for me was, how can property prices go any higher than they are already? My answer to them at that point, and this was prior to COVID and everything hitting, and it was when the market was kind of rebounding as well after the federal election, it was that kind of time. And I said, there's a driver that's not kind of picked up in the income statistics, which at that point was kind of the fractionalized buying. It's where people can join together and buy, and there's these platforms that are setting up for it. But as COVID has kind of come in and now we're onto the other side, there just seems to be more and more of those kind of influences that are helping people's incomes in order to assist them paying their mortgage payments. So for example, we've got multiple things going on. We've got, you can now build a granny flat in Victoria without having a granny, so you can put more accommodation on your property block easier and cheaper. But there's other stuff going on, like on my Instagram feed, I scroll through Instagram in the evening sometimes, and this advert came up for if you've got land, you can now rent it out to someone to park their tiny house on your land, and you can park caravans on it, and you can rent out your driveway. And now we've got kids that are able to go on the internet and set up their own little businesses, and TikTok, where you've got millions that you can generate a lot of followers in a short period of time by pretending to be stock market operator, or give it, as long as you've got a bit of charisma, you can create a following, and that following you can monetize, which of course you're very aware of, because Macro Business is a website that's an absolute excellent website, but it's been monetized. Don't you think that that's kind of like, okay, we've got interest rates going up, but that kind of, you can't use it in, obviously the banks aren't going to take it into effect when you buy a property, but certainly it's going to stop a flood of properties perhaps hitting the market.
Yeah, look, I mean, if anything, I think it could distort the unemployment statistics. So basically, to be unemployed, to not be unemployed in Australia, you only have to work 1 hour a week. So I think this is actually playing out a little bit in the labour market statistics. So basically, Australia's unemployment rate's risen. It's risen a bit. It's about 4.1%. So it has risen the last few months. But what we've actually seen is a big fall in the number of hours worked. So what we've basically had is we've had this big rotation away from full-time jobs to part-time. And I think that might be a bit of this sort of Uberized economy or gig economy. So yes, you can take on work very easily now if you need to. Whether it's driving Ubers or whatever, you can always get some work doing something. And it's probably easier than ever. And the interesting thing is this whole sharing economy thing that you're talking about, it's not just in, buying property or work, it's also renting. So we've seen this flatmates.com portal open up. I don't know, it might have been around for a few years, but I've only really heard about it in the last year. And that's basically a portal for, an easy way for people to find flatmates for share housing. And what that data shows, we've got record numbers of people now moving into share housing, which is what happens when, obviously rental costs go up and people are struggling with rents, they go into share housing. So across the economy, there's all these sort of opportunities or what have you to find portals for share housing, portals for probably buying properties, portals for taking on gig work, whether it's driving Ubers or something else, Uber Eats. There's probably a million others which I don't even know about. But ultimately, it's easy to get some work. Problem is, if everyone's doing that, you're probably going to have pretty poor wage growth, etc. So it's one of those things. It works at the individual level. If you need more work, yeah, you can find it. But if everyone's doing that, well, then you're still going to have an oversupply potentially. So, yeah. Anyway, it's an interesting development. I think if anything, it's going to have more impact on the on the labour market statistics, because you're going to have more people in jobs, even if they're chronically underemployed. But to your point, yes, it could stop some people from forced sales. So, if you have a job and you're struggling to pay your mortgage, you can take on a bit of additional work, probably more easy than you could in the past, just to get you over that hump, which I think will be over the hump anyway later in the year when the Reserve Bank starts cutting rates, but we'll probably get onto that a bit later.
Yeah. Oh, you think they're going to cut rates? I'm
do.
not forecasting that, so we can have a chat. Oh, I think we spoke about that last time when we last spoke, and you said, "Oh, now they'll pump them up," and this interview will be out there. But it's a couple of things. I've been out in the market. Louis Christopher came out with this boom bust report end of last year. He's notoriously pretty accurate, probably out of all the forecasters, as to where prices are going to go. He takes into account a lot of scenarios and a lot of data in putting together those forecasts. And he said, Melbourne was kind of softening at the end of last year, so I was getting ready for a bit of a soft start to this year. But I've got to tell you, the market's actually quite strong. The auction market's pretty much just started at the beginning of February, so we're just getting back into this sort of end of the summer season, going into autumn. And I have been bidding on properties that have needed quite a bit of repair to them. One I went to on Saturday had rising and falling damp. I mean, it was so bad. They painted over it to try and disguise it, but it was so bad. The walls were soft and you could put your finger through the skirting board, and yet it still flew at auction. There is a change in the atmosphere out there. I'm wondering if you've kind of sensed it yourself in
100%.
any of the data that you're looking at.
100%. So basically, for the last 3 weeks, the auction clearance rate data at the start of the year has come out really strong. So effectively, the auction volumes at the start of this year, so I'm talking end of January, February, went through the roof. So we've had a big boost in auction volumes, but surprisingly, usually when you have a big boost in auction volumes, you expect the clearance rate to fall because you've got more supply, demand, etc. But the clearance rates have actually been really strong. So they sort of ended the end of last year. If you look at the combined capital cities, which is really dominated by Sydney and Melbourne, so you pretty much ignore the rest because they're not auction markets. But the combined capital city clearance rate was, I think, high 50s, low 60s, and then now it's up to close to 70. The final. So what's happened is definitely the auction market has rebounded. There's no doubt about it, and that points to rising prices. If you look at the CoreLogic daily house price index, there has been a bit of a rebound. It was softening at the end of last year. It's rebounded a bit in Sydney and Melbourne. It hasn't rebounded as strongly as you'd think. And I think I think there's actually vendors, this is just my gut feeling, so you can probably correct me on it because you're in the market, but my gut feeling is that vendors are being a little bit more willing to meet buyers at their prices. And I say that both by the fact that the clearance rates are going up amid higher volumes, and also the fact that the prices don't seem to be going up by as much. And also, I know I've got two friends who sold their houses. So one sold at the last auction weekend in December, and they got a price that was, I thought, very good. It was down the street from where I live. And then another friend sold last weekend a much better house in the same suburb. I live in Ashburton, Victoria, but a much better house. And they only got a little bit more than the person who sold in December. And I was shocked. Like, we're talking $150,000 more on a house that was way more superior. So similar location, but the house is, like one was basically original, nice original, but very small with an outdoor bathroom, outdoor toilet, etc. The other one was like a 4-bedroom, fully renovated, beautiful swimming pool, all this sort of thing. And they got only a little bit more. And that to me was, and that's what, 2 months apart. And that seemed strange. Like they both sold, but one, it seems like they're, the market mightn't be quite as hot. But then again, this is based on an N=2 sample, right? So, take that with a grain of salt. But certainly the fact that the core logic daily index, whether you believe it or not, hasn't rebounded as strongly as I thought it would based on the auction clearances that we've had, suggests that maybe vendors are meeting buyers more willingly than they were at the end of last year. Not sure. Like you probably know more about that than me because you're actually in the market at the coalface.
Yeah, I mean, often when you get a situation like that, when I'm looking in the data, it can just be two very different demographics of buyer. Especially if it's on a land site, it could be somebody that's bidding on the land site. Obviously, they're looking to do complete renovation, knock it down, might be looking to do a development. So they're budgeting with different equations in mind. Then you've got something that's completely done up that has to appeal primarily just to a home buyer. And then the home buyer obviously can only borrow what the bank's going to give them. They're not going to try and generate income streams out of it from development. And so then, they're pricing it differently in their head. They are more restricted by the fact that interest rates have gone up, that banks are perhaps still being a little bit conservative about how much they're going to lend. And they've got to love the house because they don't want to renovate it. They want to go in and do work and sort of change it all. So it can just sometimes be that. It's difficult to sort of tell, but it's not completely unusual to see those situations. I think the other thing that's kind of impacted Victoria is there's been so much negative news. I interviewed Louis Christopher the other day. Actually, I really loved doing that interview with him because he is a very dynamic figure. And he does a lot of analysis on kind of like world events that are going on, which we can touch on, because I think that is kind of where I'm taking into account what could happen in terms of inflation. But he, was, he was sort of had a chat with him about what's going on in Melbourne in terms of the bad news that's out there because land tax has gone up and because they were going to, I think they are taxing Airbnb rents, and Melbourne received a heap of bad news. And then there was a prominent buyer advocacy agency, I think it's Simon Presley's buyer advocacy agency, that said at the end of last year, well, we're just blacklisting Melbourne and we're not going to buy there anymore. And then I've had a buyer that I've been dealing with as a client who wants to buy an investment property, and quite a few times he's said to me, I'm worried about buying it in Melbourne because of the number of landlords that are selling. And I think the story on the ground is actually there's not, because of the drivers perhaps that we were talking about earlier, is the fact that people can meet their income payments and they don't want to sell at a loss, and they don't want to just sell for the sake of it, if they can hold on to the property and they think they're going to get capital growth. But there's not a flood of people that are selling. Yet there's more stock, but it's not quite as bad, I think, as the news out there. So it could just be that there's a bit more caution, as that's why the results haven't come in very strong.
Yeah, and also look, Melbourne has underperformed since the start of the pandemic compared to other places. So I mean, part of that's because of the lockdowns and all the other stuff that we had. We were hit a lot harder. So yeah, we haven't had the price growth that you've had in Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth now. Perth's catching up. Etc. So we have underperformed, which means that logically, we should probably have stronger price growth going forward if you base it on that. Interestingly, I actually think the houses in my area, so this is only my particular suburb, Ashburton, but I don't think it's had any price growth for about 5 years. So I remember about 5 years ago, I could have got the same price for my house as I reckon I get now. It hasn't really gone up that much, maybe the last 4 years. But that's just my area. There's obviously other areas which would be different. But yeah, Melbourne's hasn't really, Melbourne's been a bit of an underperformer for several years. And I think that part of it's the sort of stuff you've been saying, like we've got a pretty bad reputation down here. There's obviously more taxes that come in. We had the heavy lockdowns, all that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, there's probably other areas like not the detached house market in Ashburton that are doing better, but certainly in my area, I don't think there's, we've barely had any price growth for years. It sort of seemed to peak sort of 5 years ago, and it's just been flatlining since, up and down a bit.
But of course, it's not the only place where you own property, is it, Leith?
No, it's not. I got an investment home in Brisbane. So
we can disclose that you are a property specufester.
Yep.
And own other property in Brisbane, which is actually doing pretty well. And I think, that was sort of Louis Christopher. He had two things in his report which I really kind of loved. One was by Perth, which he put in bold. Did you read that?
No, I didn't read it, but look, it makes sense. So
such a great report.
Yeah, so when I bought my place, so basically I've had this dream to move north for forever, right? Only thing stopping me is my wife, family, because she's very close to her family. I don't want to leave my mum. She's old and all that sort of stuff. And, so family, and plus got kids at school. But yeah, I have this kind of, I don't know if it'll ever happen, but this dream to one day move up north to preferably the Gold Coast. But so anyway, in 2020, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to hedge my bets. Because I knew when the Olympics got announced, I thought, and Brisbane seemed so cheap at the time, and Gold Coast compared to Melbourne. I thought I want to hedge my bets in case they want to move up there. I don't want to be in a situation where prices rocket up there, they catch up with Sydney and Melbourne, and then I can never move there. So I bought a house investment house in a place called Holland Park in Brisbane, and luckily, fortuitously, timed it to perfection. Got it at the end of 2020, and it's probably gone up 40%, 45, I think, if you go by the average stats since then. So yeah, lucky me. But that was basically a hedge on, and I didn't think about Perth at the time, but I don't want to move to Perth. So I wanted to have a perfect hedge. Not that I'd ever live in this place in Brisbane. It's not where I want to live, but at least, the Brisbane and Gold Coast market moved together. So I thought, well, I might as well own a place there, and if I ever move up there and prices rocket, it becomes unaffordable. At least I've got a hedge against that. So I won't be priced and forced to live in, cold winters forever in Melbourne, which I hate.
Yeah. And for anyone that bought at that time, how great was that to get the stimulus flooding through the economy? Because in my mind, that was the thing that really fed into land prices, is that cash went into people's bank accounts, and in some situations are still sitting in people's bank accounts. Obviously savings have dropped a bit, but it was a great time. So Louis Christopher kind of came out in his report and said, buy Perth for the short term, buy Perth for the long term, undervalued, there's a lot going on there, great economy. And he had a real positive report for Brisbane as well. He said, that's my other area. I've been a bit more conservative about it because obviously, I am forecasting a downturn into 2028. I've looked and looked and looked at the timing, and at the moment, I really feel that is accurate timing for the cycle that I talk about, which is the 18-year property cycle. It doesn't mean that it couldn't extend a little bit longer, and it doesn't mean that it couldn't pull up shorter, but I'll go into with my subscribers why I think that we're still on set on that timing. But Brisbane, after we've had downturns, and the markets kind of correct themselves a bit, the main attention goes back into Melbourne and Sydney. And I think the concern about pushing people into the Brisbane market isn't that it's not going to do well. It's, well, how much can the Olympics, for example, which is one of the reasons that Louis is looking at it and saying a lot of infrastructure going in there, is that really going to support it up, a little bit like Sydney was supported, you know, in that lead up to the Olympics, because Sydney did very well through the 2000s until it sort of burnt itself out in 2004. I don't know if you've got an opinion about.
Yeah, basically, so Brisbane's still relatively affordable. Look, it's losing that advantage against Melbourne now because it's had so much catch up growth, whereas Melbourne hasn't grown much. So it is starting to lose that advantage, but it's still massively cheap compared to Sydney. And you know, the thing about it is we're running these mass migration policies, which are basically going mostly into Sydney and Melbourne, and that's squeezing people out. So you're getting a lot of people saying, you know what, I've had it at these two places, I'm going up north because it's cheaper, the lifestyle's arguably better, you know, the cold winters, all that sort of stuff. But that will eventually play through, and I think it'll play out by Brisbane not necessarily catching up exactly to Sydney and Melbourne, but the gap between the affordability gap will close. And once it does close, well then, you know, it's probably just going to be steady as she goes. But I think it's still got more catch up to do. And part of that's the migration thing. And obviously all the investment from the Olympics is going to be a stimulus. It probably might be a good idea to sell out, you know, in about 2031 or whatever before the Olympics hit. Because if you remember, Sydney had a bit of a lull for about 4 years or so after the Sydney Olympics. So maybe Brisbane will do the same thing, but you know, it's definitely got more to run. It's just basically the affordability gap between Brisbane and Sydney, especially, is still massive. Even though it's narrowed because Brisbane's had this big boom. So I think that'll just keep it. You know, you'll still get the Southerners going up north for quite a while yet, I think, and they'll bring they'll sell their expensive Sydney homes, and they'll think Brisbane's cheap, and they'll start bidding up Brisbane homes. And it's not great if you're, you know, wanting to buy a house in Brisbane if you're a first home buyer, or you want to buy in the next couple of years and you keep seeing the price go up. But that's just unfortunately the nature of the property market. It's like a balloon. We bring in all these overseas migrants into Sydney and Melbourne. You push on one side of the balloon, the other side people push out, they go up to Brisbane. And that's kind of the way we've set the system up. So that's the way it is, unfortunately.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe we should then talk about, you know, these next couple of years in particular, I see as actually being pretty strong for property markets. I certainly do not think that we're on the precipice of any kind of recession or any kind of crash. We've got immigration pouring in. We've still got tight job markets. We've got multiple ways to earn income. We've got the advancement of technology and AI, which is, you know, going to bring some pretty big wealth building opportunities, I feel, to, you know, companies, the profit building opportunities for companies. I have done a few interviews, did interview with Louis Christopher on this, and, you know, we talked about rates, and we were all in agreement with Louis Christopher, another guy called David Murrin, who's a UK global forecaster, talks a lot about war and what's going on in the global political tensions. He's forecasting that we're heading for war. And I personally just don't think that we're going to see interest rates come down unless there's some significant weakness in the economy. So curious as to why you would think that the RBA is going to drop rates.
Okay, two reasons. First, inflation's got falling globally now. So we've basically got an unwind of what happened during the pandemic. So people might remember when the pandemic hit, basically had factories shut down left, right, and centre all around the world. They all went into hiatus because, you know, obviously people couldn't be face to face anymore, etc. You also had shipping lanes basically shut down, and then the governments around the world also pumped massive amounts of stimulus. So what happened if you set your sights back, the inflation shock started off as a supply shock. So it was basically we had supply bottlenecks everywhere. Goods couldn't get imported into countries anymore, whether it's cars or whatever, materials, all that sort of thing. And that set prices rising. You also had obviously rising demand from stimulus. And that's what set the inflation fire off. And then we got the second round effects of then people going, well, my incomes aren't keeping up with that. And they started wanting higher wages, etc., and all the other stuff that goes with it. So you get the local services inflation. Now we've got an unwind of that. So basically, China is now exporting deflation. So all the factories are back open. The shipping lanes are open, except for, you know, the Houthis attacking the Middle East, whatever. But that's a small player at the moment. And so basically anything that comes off a boat is now falling in price. And you see it when you go to GB Hi-Fi, there's TVs that are super cheap now. Everything's coming down. That comes off a boat. So what that's doing is that's now lowering inflation globally. And, Canada, so we're recording this on a Thursday. Canada on, I think, Wednesday our time, Tuesday Canada's time, just recorded their latest inflation print, way under expectations. Our latest one was below the RBA's expectations. Pretty much everywhere inflation is now falling, right? So that's taking the pressure off raising rates again. And at the same time, we've now got basically economies pretty much left, right, and centre now in either full-blown recessions or per capita recessions. So us, Canada, and New Zealand, we're all in per capita recessions because although we've got this high immigration, which is keeping the overall economic pie growing slowly, per capita, we're going backwards. Retail sales are falling. There's been big cutbacks on discretionary spending. The labour market now has turned the corner in most countries. And in Australia, we're now seeing it with the number of hours worked across the economy, which is the single best indicator because it's not distorted by the participation rate and all the other stuff, has fallen for 6 straight months. And basically the economy is weakening faster than what the RBA thought. Inflation's coming back down quicker than what the RBA thought. Same with other central banks. And for that reason, I strongly believe that us and other central banks will be cutting rates in the second half. And some central banks might actually cut before the second half. And when that happens, it's obviously not going to be great. Well, it's going to be great if you're an investor, but I'm saying not great for housing if you're concerned about affordability, because once that happens and you get more borrowing capacity, you still got mass immigration, you're going to basically have further stimulus to prices. So that's basically my view on it. I think I'm strongly of the view that the Reserve Bank is going to cut rates later this year. I've been holding that view since, I think it was November last year when I first said it on Sky News and they all thought I was crazy. But I'm sticking by it. And interestingly, some of the major banks are now joined in, Commonwealth Bank, Westpac, some other economists are now starting to think that as well. Now, the big fly in the ointment is obviously if we have war. Well, if we have war, all bets are off. Like, I don't know if we're going to have war or not. Geez, I hope not. But I think if we did, cutting interest rates is going to be the last of our concerns. But, save for not having war and, if the external environment doesn't deteriorate worse than what it is at the moment, I think interest rates second half. So that's basically my thesis and my views on why interest rates are going to fall.
We'll know soon because we're not far from the second half of the year. How far years go now? Feels like they just go faster each year.
Tell me about it. I'm 46 now, and I remember having my 30th birthday party. My wife pregnant with my first kid, and it feels like it was about 5 years ago. So there you go. It was 16 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. We won't talk about age and how fast things go, but I personally feel that war is almost inevitable. I mean, I guess I'm a little bit close to what's going on in the Middle East.
Do you mean like World War or just like some more because we've already got war in the Middle East. We've got war between Israel, Palestine, and then we've got Russia, Ukraine. Do you mean extending beyond that? Because my big concern, and this is where all bets are off, is if, say, China used these two wars as cover while the world's preoccupied to, say, invade Taiwan. If that happens, well, Jesus, I hope that doesn't. I hope it doesn't happen. But that's always a clear and present danger. But whether that, even if it was to happen, would it happen this year? Would it happen next year? Would it happen the year after? I don't know. That's why I prefer not to even try and forecast it, because I've honestly got no idea. I just see it as a potential threat that I hope does not happen.
Well, I mean, I've done quite a bit of analysis on it, probably since I first interviewed David Murrin, who's a global forecaster in the UK, but he's a war expert, for want of a better word. He's spent his entire life studying war, and he's a very intelligent man, and he's sort of created this 5 empire model. So he's looked at the patterns of history, and he feels that the war is a part of human evolution. It's almost like an inevitable part of our evolution. And he's extremely interesting, and I interviewed him a couple of times last year because he wrote a book in 2020 called Redlining: How China Won World War III in 2025. And he kind of did it as a bit of a wake-up call. He wanted to wake governments up because he feels that England is underdefended. The West in general is underdefended. The West is looking weak, to Iran, to Russia, to China. And so, he feels that if there was war, we don't stand a chance based on the defense that we have. And he feels that Australia is in that position. So I might actually send you those interviews. I interviewed him very recently again, because I enjoy him as a person. I really enjoy his analysis. And he does it based on the Kondratiev cycle as well. So the Kondratiev cycle, for your viewers, my viewers are pretty keyed up on it now, but it's a commodity cycle that was discovered by Nikolai Kondratiev in the time of Stalin, and he looked at the Western commodity markets, and he noticed that there was a kind of 25-year upward trend and a 25-year downward trend. And as you got to the peak of those markets, because commodities are the things that fuel nations, there becomes we need commodities in order to bring in the new technology and to thrive and survive in the new age. So at the moment, it's all about electric cars, and we need certain rare earth minerals to bring us forward, that you get tensions over the trade routes and the trade lines, and and that brings in an atmosphere of war. And it just so happens that at the peak of every Kondratiev cycle, war has broken out. And we're approaching the peak of the Kondratiev cycle now, probably around 2027. And so he's saying, okay, war's going to break out. Obviously, we've got war between Russia and Ukraine. We've now got it between Israel and Hamas. Hamas are a proxy for Iran. It is an Iranian-Israeli war, and all the supply routes are around the area as well. So there's a significant threat to the supply lines there, but there's also a threat over what's going on in the Panama Canal, for example, where they're saying, okay, climate change is causing drought conditions, and the canal can only take so many ships through it now. It's losing water. There's no viable alternative, which means that you've got a backup of shipping lanes and an inflationary environment building up there. And he strongly feels it can only be a world war if China gets involved. Otherwise we've got regional wars. But he really feels that it is inevitable and a plan that China will move on Taiwan at this time, because there's not been a better time for them to move on it. And of course, if they do, then we do have a world war. And all my subscribers are saying, well, if we have a world war, what do we do? What happens to our property prices? Where do we put our money? What happened in the last wars? I mean, in the last wars, when war broke out, there were tax breaks, there were mortgage holidays, the stock markets ran on reduced times. Your investment went into materials for the war. So it wasn't that there was no areas for investment, but it was, obviously it's as you said, all bets are off, because it interferes then with the normal economic pattern. Now, he's not the only one that's forecasting war. I think Ray Dalio has kind of come back in his forecast a little bit, but Fred Harrison, Fred Harrison, surely, have interviewed him multiple times. He's a student of history, has written over 20 books, and he also has felt for a long time that World War III will come at the peak of this cycle. And I feel that we've seen these tensions build up. So in my mind, if it's going to happen, the timing has never been more accurate for it. There's also an 84-year war cycle for the US wars. There's a few kind of cycles that are sort of colliding at this time. That's why I feel that we are looking at, even though we've got problems in Western Australia with nickel and, there's a few localized issues that are going on there, the generalized trend for materials is up, not just because of new technology, but also because supply lines are under threat, and that's causing problems. But the other thing that I think kind of plays into this a little bit is, you were talking about the inflation data that came out in Australia. Good friend of mine, Kate Bakos, I was listening to her. She's very on the ground in the property market, deals with a lot of clients. And I was listening to her on a podcast the other day, and she said, I reckon that inflationary data was more of a stimulus for the market than anything else, because it gave people confidence that we're not going to see further hikes in interest rates, and interest rates could come down. and actually one of the vendors of a client, I was negotiating for a client on the property, gosh, it was actually the second weekend in February, turned up, I had to go and bid at auction for that one, but the vendor would not sell prior to auction because he said, no, I want a higher price because they're going to reduce interest rates. So I think even like that, you know, people are pricing it in, that it's getting priced into the market already. And that, to me, no matter what's going on elsewhere, is ultimately inflationary, because if the RBA see the property market take off and it starts to get a little bit out of control again, I think there'll be a lot of pressure for them not to pull their foot off the pedal.
Yeah, that's a possibility, but at the same time, the economic data stinks, right? So you know, if you look at the retail sales and all the other stuff, like the household spending indicator, etc., we're likely to have another really poor GDP print for the December quarter come out early next month. Now, obviously, that's backward looking. We know that, but pretty much most of the economic data that's come out has been very poor, and the labor force is weakening, and all the forward-looking indicators on the labor force are very, very poor. So, one of my favorite figures now is one of my favorite data points, forward-looking data points now, is Seek puts together a series where they basically where they track the number of applications per job ad. Now, that if you plot that against the unemployment rate, it's a very, very good leading indicator. And the number of applications per job ad has actually soared well above pre-pandemic levels. And the reason why it's soared is because it's twofold. We've had a biggest labor supply increase pretty much in history. And that's not just from mass immigration. That's the main driver. But the other one is Peter Costello's baby bonus kids from the early 2000s have now hit working age. So they're now hitting the labour market at the same time. So we have this massive spike of labour supply. At the same time, because of high interest rates, you know, the recession, the per capita recession, employers aren't, their demand for workers is falling. So we're effectively having this big surge in labour supply at the same time as employment demands weakening from employers. And that points to just much higher unemployment, underemployment in the months ahead. And that would be one of the key indicators that the Reserve Bank looks at, because you know, the labour market is now catching up with the weakness of the economy as per capita GDP, etc. And so the Reserve Bank's not just going to look at inflation; it's going to look at the economy, and the economy is weakening. I think worse than what the Reserve Bank thought. And just to put that into perspective, the unemployment rate currently is 4.1%. The Reserve Bank, in its latest statement of monetary policy, tipped that unemployment would be at 4.3% by the end of the year. So it's only 0.2% above what it was in January. Now, that 4.3% is certain to get overrun pretty quickly. Like, you know, it could be by March or April. And once it's overrun, they've already, you know, the unemployment rate will be running well ahead of what the RBA's expectations were. And if that happens, it means the economy is slowing a lot quicker than what the RBA expected. And that'll just be another reason to cut interest rates in the second half. But anyway, we shall see. Like all this stuff with, you know, Taiwan, China, all that sort of stuff. That's a black swan. You know, I mean, it's a black swan whether that happens this year, which is the forecast horizon I'm looking at, or if it happens within 3 years. And if it happens this year, well, then all bets are off anyway, as we said. So I think we're going to have a bit more to worry about than what the cash rate's doing, because yeah, the idea of World War III is very, very depressing. So I'm not sure if I should watch those videos. I might get depressed.
Yeah, I don't want to depress you. Yeah, I mean, I think that in recording those videos, you still kind of have it as it could happen. You don't sort of live the reality. But I've got
it's honestly the number one risk. So I view that as Australia's number one threat is China invading Taiwan. Because, you know, what the hell are we going to do in that situation? We've had massive immigration from Chinese citizens, residents, in the last sort of 15, 20 years. And then you're in this weird situation where it's like, hang on, they've invaded Taiwan. Are we on China's side or not? And do we stay neutral? And then if we don't stay neutral, what about all the, you know, I don't know, it might be 1 million people who have Chinese descent in this country? You're going to have the questions about their loyalty and all this sort of stuff. And it's a situation, it's just, it's going to be very, very ugly. And we saw it during the Second World War when obviously we're at war with Japan. And, you know, we had situations where Japanese Australians were. There weren't that many compared to what we have now with, China, for example. But, those people put in tournament camps. Well, hopefully we're not going to do that again. But you're going to have all those sticky situations come up. And it's something it's my worst nightmare, actually, is obviously World War III. Nobody wants war. Like, I guess, a student of history. I watch too much stuff on the Second World War on YouTube and etc. and battles and everything that happened with the Holocaust, etc. I'm not like it is my worst nightmare is that we have World War III and that China does invade Taiwan, and I just hope to death it doesn't happen. But yeah, it's a black swan, and look, it is it is my number one risk to Australia, and not just Australia, the world. To be honest with you, obviously, war is terrible. So let's hope it doesn't happen. But I'm not forecasting it this year, so I don't. I hope it doesn't happen at all. But so I wouldn't even factor that into the interest rate deliberations. But knowing it could happen, obviously, at any time.
I mean, it's one of those things when I do the interviews, that I'm kind of like a little bit in fantasy land with it, because we talk about it and I really do feel that there's a real possibility of it. But obviously it was a bit like prior to COVID, there were a few people that wrote to me at that time and said, "Oh, Catherine, I think that the virus is going to be the trigger for the mid-cycle," because we'd always said, that's the point of the recession. What's going to trigger this mid-property cycle recession? And, at the time I didn't want to even conceive that we might be shut down. It really impacted me, that lockdown did, sort of living on my own and where I was living. So it was a difficult time. But the thing about that, I'm pretty aware of it because I've got very close associates in Israel. And it has been heartbreaking what's been occurring in that area, not just what's been occurring there, but also the misinformation and the ignorance in the protesting and everything of people. They don't really know what they're protesting for or the history of it, not to say that there's no controversy there, but the situation is very depressing because it makes me realize how war does affect people on the ground. We're very insulated from it. But there you don't get a full night's sleep without the sirens going off, and people, they don't want to go out and socialize because they feel that, every day their friends are being killed or they're hearing some of the tragic story. I mean, it's a very depressed situation to live in. So I agree with you. I hope it doesn't happen. But the other thing that we haven't mentioned, which of course is also inflationary, is the stage 3 tax cuts. However, that's going to manifest itself. It's opened a lot of conversations in the media. It's what has got me personal media attention because I'm president of Prosper. We do an enormous amount of work on tax reform at Prosper and how that impacts different sectors of the economy and how it impacts the land markets. And of course, I think it was one of the banks that came out and said, hey, this is equivalent to a 0.5, 50 basis point cut in the cash rate if we get stage 3 coming through as spruiked.
Yes and no. So yeah, I did say, but CBA also came out and they did their own analysis, said it's small beer, and CBA's forecasts actually were that we're going to have. So just to take this back a notch, one of the reasons why household disposable incomes have collapsed. So Australia's suffered the biggest collapse in real per capita household disposable income in the advanced world in the year to September, because. And there's several reasons for that. Firstly, we've had the wage growth elsewhere. We've obviously had a cost of living shock. Obviously, our mortgage rates have gone up faster here than just about anywhere else because we've got such a high share of variable rate mortgages. But the other big factor is we've had a massive rise in income tax payments because of bracket creep. So in the year to September, total income tax payments went up 22.5%, whereas total incomes, so wages and salaries, etc., only went up 7.5%. So we've lost a hell of a lot of household disposable income to income tax in terms of bracket creep. Now, CBA's research shows that even with the stage 3 tax cuts, we'll be paying a higher share of household disposable income in tax next year than we did this year. So although, yes, it's giving back some of the bracket creep, the bracket creep is still going to be taking more in aggregate than what the stage 3 tax cuts are going to give back. So I don't think it's as inflationary as everyone thinks, because we're still going to have a lot of money getting pulled out from bracket creep. So what bracket creep is, you don't necessarily have to go up into a higher tax bracket, but if your income goes up because of inflation, it's not keeping up with inflation, your average tax rate rises, right? So, and that's basically what Australians have suffered from in the last year or so. And it's interesting that even Wednesday's wage price index rose by 4.2%, which was 0.1 above the inflation rate, 4.1% in the year. But actually, after tax, it still went backwards because that 4.2% doesn't adjust for the extra income tax paid. So the notion that this is as stimulatory as everyone thinks, I don't think is correct, because we're going to be losing so much household income in bracket group. So yeah, it'll be marginally inflationary, but not a lot. And my favorite bank economists now are the CBA, like they seem to do the best analysis. And that's out of all the bank economic stuff I read, there seems to be most of the money. And they basically said it's going to be a very minor impact once you account for all the bracket group. So
well, we'll see. I mean, their forecasts, their housing forecasts haven't been great at the CBA, but
I think they said 10% peak to trough decline. So I think we got pretty close to that.
oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I thought they actually called it, but they changed their forecast quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone does. I mean, no one's perfect.
Well,
Certainly, well, even Lou's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But the like their CBA have had the direction of interest rates correct, not the quantum of interest rates correct. So they were one of the first to say we're going to have interest rate hikes. But they didn't think it peaked to anywhere near what we are now. But they do seem to get the direction right in a lot of ways. And I'm talking about the economy. I'm not talking about house prices. Pretty much everyone, bar the kook, was wrong on the house price thing. I think even Louis was probably wrong on that. Louis tipped a bigger correction than what we got. But I'm not even shot at Louis because he was more right than I was, and his history is very good. But pretty much the only economist I know, like market economists I know, that was on the money was the kook. Pretty much like 90% of everyone else. Might have been, there's probably some others which I don't even know about, but 90% of us were wrong. So the CBA is certainly not the only one there. But I just think the impact from the stage 3 tax cuts is overdone. And the other thing we need to realise is that the average mortgage rate in Australia paid is still going up. So even if the RBA holds rates, the monetary tightening is still occurring. That's because we've still got these fixed rate mortgages that are resetting. The ones that were set really cheap during the pandemic are still switching over to variable. It's not happening as quickly as it did last year, but there's still more of that happening. And what that means is that the average mortgage rate paid across Australia is continuing to rise. And that is monetary tightening. So even with the RBA keeping the cash rate on hold, we're still getting monetary tightening. And that's going to play out for another 6 months. So that'll offset the stimulus anyway.
And yet, property prices.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an immigration story.
To increase.
Well, I mean, but that gets to my point. So if the RBA does start cutting rates, as I think they will in the second half, that's a red rag to a bull for property, because all the forces are pushing it up, right? You've got obviously, not much market supply. Like despite the fact that the auction listings have gone up, the for sale listings are still below historical levels by a lot. You got, near record demand. If it's not record, immigration is going to come off a bit, but still historically high demand from population growth. Then you've got the housing supply situation in terms of building homes is completely stuffed. So all the forward-looking indicators in construction, dwelling approvals, commencements, new home finance. So finance for new homes, they're all at historic, decade lows at least. And what that tells you is that we're not going to be building nearly enough homes. In fact, we're going to be building less homes this year than we did last year, and probably less homes the year after next year than we did this year. So we're going to have this slump in new home construction exactly precisely the time that we've got this unbelievably historically high population growth. And that's obviously going to create more FOMO, a bigger structural housing shortages, lower rental vacancy rates, et cetera, et cetera. So all that's an impetus. And that's, again, I think that is the number one reason why property prices have rebounded in the last 12 months, despite the higher interest rates. Like interest rates are still gone up, yet property prices have gone up, and it's a population story. And and population story combined with low supply, not just listings. That's one form. That's market supply, but also structural supply in terms of building homes. Both of those are stuffed, and so unfortunately it's a demand supply story. And to his credit, the kook picked it. He was the only one. I always thought that interest rates would overweigh that stuff. And I never thought we'd get immigration like this. I don't think the kook did either, to be honest with you. But I think no one did. But it's a demand supply story, and I think that's why we've experienced this rebound. Also FOMO, because nobody wants to rent now. It's really hard to get a home to rent. It's uber expensive. You have to line up with 100 people and be one of 30 applications or something. So that's creating FOMO as well. People are desperate to buy because they don't want to be in the rental market anymore. And that's just creating more upward pressure on house prices. So again, that's a population story.
I always said that the property market wasn't going to fall anywhere near as far as they were speaking. And I actually think Louis Christopher did come out pretty accurate, honestly, on that. But yeah, I mean, that was why I interviewed the cook after the great housing debate, because it was such a great story between him and Louis Christopher where they went up head to head and sorry, not Louis Christopher.
Chris Joy.
Chris Joy, yeah.
Yeah.
Because Chris Joy kind of misfired. Mind you, the cook is calling it for a downturn, I think, this year. Anyway, we'll see how things play out.
I'm pretty sure the cook blocked me on Twitter, so I can't actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I can't seem to get his tweets anymore, so I don't know why, because I've actually been pretty complimentary of him in the last year. So anyway, but I might be wrong on that, but yeah, I don't seem to get his tweets anymore on my feed. So yeah, I can't tell you what he's thinking on that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think otherwise everything, I there's a real advantage to being on the ground and being in the property market, because you see things and you get a sense of where the market's going to go ahead of time outside of the economic data. And then overlaying that, I always put the cycle on top of that and just think, what is the overall trend in this cycle? And the overall trend for the property cycle right now is that we're in the second half. It's a strong half of the cycle, and it is up. So even though, we have these localized stuff that goes on, we had the boom in COVID that boom had to come back. We had the historic rise in rates. Again, the impact on the markets was nowhere near as severe as people were saying, which really goes to show that there is a element in the analysis that a lot of people are missing, that you can't analyze the property market with this kind of one-eyed focus on what the lending rates are anymore, even though they're a massive part of what drives property prices and a leading indicator of where prices are going to go, because obviously a property is worth what you can buy, so what you can borrow. But yeah, I think that's kind of like the lesson, honestly, when we do our analysis, is that you have to take into account a range of other drivers, and then you have to kind of like look at what the atmosphere is generally like in the property market. I mean, I can tell you now, I work with a heap of traders. We do a lot of developments, work with a lot of developers, a lot of people that are renovating. They are so busy at the moment with doing work. There's numerous properties that I'm assisting with where we're renovating the properties for sale, and that there's energy in the market right now. So despite all the bad news and all the what we're going to have, what we're going to have coming in the future, either interest rates going up or interest rates falling, there is energy in the market, and that kind of gives an idea that there is areas for investment, not just in the property market, but maybe also in the stock market. In terms of building materials, in the stock market in terms of where the commercial property prices are going and where REITs are going. There's some big REITs which I think are getting to the point where they're a little bit undervalued, and we could see some rises in certainly quality office stock. Because there is a little bit of return to the office, and the quality stock is short in supply, and also with really good well located and well run shopping centers. So that there's multiple areas here where I feel that investors, and we both have investors that want to make money out of this, can grasp hold of, certainly for the next year. And if you're right, and we do see interest rates go down, then that is going to feed even more so into all of those sectors, because I can tell you now, if property prices start to take off, you'll get another development cycle that will come in with that, because it will become more profitable.
Well, when you think about it logically, the only thing that's holding the property market back is interest rates. So once that that negating factor starts to ease, well, then what's holding it back? And all those opportunities you're talking about are basically related to the population Ponzi. Whether it's shopping centres, commercial, etc. All that, if you keep fire hosing in people into Australia, into the big cities and stuff, you're going to create demand for all those things. And this is why big business loves it so much, because they get to privatise the benefits from it. So, if you're a Harvey Norman, there is nothing better for your business than having the population growing at over 2% a year, because that means that, other things equal, your retail sales are going to grow by 2% before you've even done anything, just through population growth. And it's the same for all these types of businesses. So there's always opportunities from it. If you're looking at it from an investor. And another classic example is Transurban. I mean, Transurban runs toll roads. More people means more cars, which means more traffic, which means more demand for your toll roads. So this is why corporations love it. And if you're an investor, well, you need to you can rally against the Ponzi like I do on a daily basis, but at the same time, you still got to put your money somewhere. So you might as well, if you're going to get ripped off by it in your living standards, well, you might as well make $1 out of it to compensate.
Yeah, absolutely. And you wrote something, I think, today. I was checking it out this morning as I was waiting to bid at a boardroom auction this morning, and I was reading through your headlines about new car sales.
Yep.
Do you want to update on what's going on?
Yeah, so basically, new car sales hit a record high in January, according to the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries. The interesting thing is, though, Alex Joyner, who's a gun economist at IFM Investors, he does fantastic charts. Him and Justin Farbo are like my two favourite macro chart guys. They just put together data and really interesting. But he did a fantastic chart, basically showing that imports of cars into Australia are growing a lot faster than new car sales. So if you want to go and check it out, it's on the site. And there's been a big gap between, so imports of cars have record high, but a much bigger record high than new car sales. And what that points to is we're going to have a glut of new cars now in Australia. So expect a lot of discounting because dealer lots are going to be just chock full of new cars. And again, this is that deflationary influence from China. So China is now massively ramped up their car exports. So it's not just from China, but that's an example, as well as all their manufactured goods. And they're now dumping them on the world. And the prices are actually, they're selling them at lower prices than they did previously. And that's one of the reasons why I got this global disinflation, because we've now got oversupply of, consumer goods, manufactured goods, anything that comes off a container ship, basically. And that's helping to push down inflation pressures globally. And it's exact reverse, like I said before, of what happened at the start of the pandemic, where the inflation pulse began on the supply side through freight. And then it filtered into everything else. Well, now we've got the opposite of that, where the inflation pulse is coming down from the supply side through freight, because all that stuff's falling in price. And so and then that'll then filter into everything else. So effectively, that's the new car sales story. We've got an oversupply of cars now in lots across dealerships in Australia. So if you're looking for a new car, like I personally would never buy a new car because you get ripped off, and you're better off buying a secondhand one. Let someone else take the hit. But if you are looking for a new car, you should be able to negotiate a good deal, by the mid-year sales.
Yeah, I got one just before we were locked down. It's just like
So I just sat in the garage.
Well, no,
Appreciated.
Yeah,
Sorry.
the furthest trip I did was around the corner to the supermarket and then back. That was really a great investment.
God, it sucked that time, didn't it?
Yeah, I was talking to actually, I must get him on for an interview. Akil Patel, my listeners will know him. He's over here from England at the moment, and he was fascinated by what happened in Australia during the lockdowns, because I was saying, I just like there would I went for weeks without talking to a soul, you know.
Oh, you're talking to me on the phone. I remember talking to you, and you were bummed out big time. I can't blame you.
Yeah, I was. It was a difficult time, but I'd bought that car, and yeah, he was trying to get a handle of the psychology, and you know, obviously at that time I'd forecast this downturn, you know, I'd forecast this mid-cycle dip, and the dip was pretty severe. and it didn't feel, he was talking about how it felt in England, you know, and it like didn't feel as bad over there. And I was saying, you know, like here, when we had those significant lockdowns in Melbourne, there were points in time where we thought we were never going to come out of lockdown because it was so severe. And Dan was, you know, he was not going to let up, and if you're caught out on the street, we're going to arrest you and you will be fined. And yeah, I mean, it was, the psychology at that time was pretty significant as to,
yeah, and you had neighbors trying to dob you in if you did anything, and it's just ridiculous. Like I remember literally walking around Ashburton, so this is in Melbourne, low density suburb, you know, suburban, and I went for a walk and I didn't have a mask on because I was like, I'm not wearing a mask in this thing. And one of those rapid response, you know, those the narco police with the masks on, they pulled up next to me and started driving next to me at walking speed and trying to intimidate me. And then I just put my mask on, and then they drove off, and I just took it off again. But it was like, it was in Ashburton. There was no one around. I literally could have spewed up on the sidewalk and no one would have even known, right? Because they couldn't see you. There was no one. Like I could have, you know, coughed or whatever, and I wouldn't have hit anyone. There was no one around. I was like, there was no one on the other side of the street. There's no one in front of me for 100 meters, no one behind me. And yet this dude, this narco cop with one of his face masks on, pulled up next to me and started like walking next to me, trying to intimidate me because I wasn't wearing a mask. It was insane. And let's hope we never see that again.
Yeah, I really hope we never see that again. Yeah, I mean, it was I was going to leave the country at that point. I was just going to get out. But it was interesting. It was interesting conversation with him because he was fascinated by how it had affected me psychologically, you know, in the chat that we had. But yeah, anyway, we should probably wind up. We've been going for a while, so thanks, Leith. I'll definitely get you back again in a couple of months, and we'll have another. And we'll see whether interest rates are going to go down, whether they're going to go up, whether they're still on hold.
Second half, so I've got was it 10 months?
Yeah, you've got a little bit of time before.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got to give yourself a wide runway, right? Second half means July to December. So
to December, okay.
Yeah. So you know, sometime in the second half. I don't know when. Who knows? But I think it's going to happen.
Yeah,
so we'll see what happens.
I need to get you back on then January 2025.
Yeah,
a year's time to see, whether this forecast happened or not. We can talk again though in the meantime.
Yeah, for sure. No worries.
There's actually a lot more to talk about that I'd like to discuss, particularly stuff that's going on in the housing market, but we'll save that for another time.
Too easy.
Too easy. Thanks so much, Leith. We'll talk
no
soon.
worries. Just one last thing. If anybody wants to check out my interviews, stay in touch with them, go to @Leithvo, Leithvo on YouTube. So that's just where I put up like daily interviews, and I'll probably put this podcast up at some point. But watch it on Catherine's channel, obviously, first, and that's where you want to read it. And that's what am I saying? That's where you will be watching it because you're watching this right now. Sorry, I'm an idiot. Anyway, and also www.macrobusiness.com.au is where I write daily.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so everybody realizes, Macro Business, obviously, how long have you been going now, Macro Business?
12 years, I think.
Yeah, we had a chat about it on the phone the other day. We were talking about how long you've been going, but you know, it's one of those websites where you get information that you cannot get anywhere else. And I need to be really specific about that, because that's why I see now property spruikers are bringing up your blogs and sending them out as if they've written them, and you know, using them to sort of split the property market. But the charts are fantastic. The analysis is really great. It's you know, it's non-mainstream analysis, and that's why you've become so popular on Sky and even the ABC to go on and talk about, you know, what's really going on in the economy. I can't believe that we're at this stage. You know, we're sort of in 2024 and we're still, you know, in this situation where we have two economic stories, one that comes from the mainstream, which is doesn't tell you anything about what's really going on. It doesn't, it talks about a rental crisis, but doesn't mention immigration, and then like a whole heap of other stuff that's saying, actually, no, this is what's really happening. And if you can do that with charts and great analysis, that's what macro business is. It's not just people sounding off on Twitter, I think this is happening. It's this is happening, and here's the evidence for it. And I've obviously known you for years and years. I've written articles for macro business and that in the long dismal past. So yeah, great resource. Long may it live.
All right, thank you. Yeah, well, it's been going 12 years now. What started off as a hobby is now turned into a career. So hopefully we'll see what happens.
Yes.
I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, hopefully not. Hopefully you can buy a few more. You can become a bit more of a property specuvester.
I'll tell you this much: I wouldn't buy another one. I don't think. Look, I'm not really, only invest in property is fine, but it's a pain in the butt in some ways, because obviously you got the costs and with all the storms in Brisbane, I've had problems with the roof and all this other stuff you got to deal with and all that stuff. So look, for me personally, I'm underinvested in the share market. So when I eventually have some disposable income, my kids are gone, which won't be for years anyway. I'll probably put it into the share market. Just to be diversified as well. Because I've got a house, my own house. I've got an investment property. I mean, how much, I've got enough. Like that's fine. So I want something liquid, I think. So I'll probably, eventually when I have some disposable income, I'll probably look at the share market, to be quite honest with you. So I'm never going to be a full property parasite.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, that's good to know. I was going to say, you're not going to dabble around in crypto or.
No, I'm too old school. I don't understand it. So, I'll just stick to the proven, 100-year-old assets, just because I'm old. I'm 46. I'm too old for that stuff.
Yeah, you are. You're really getting on now, Leith. So,
I am.
Bit of a grandpa. Yes. Anyway, we'll tie it up there, and
All right. See ya.